In July 2025, Lucas, a 19-year-old, traveled to the Tigard Lake Camp, located in the isolated and peaceful village of Pine Ridge in the interior of Oregon. He was accompanied by his longtime friend Sean, 20, and other college classmates. Among them were Sophia, Sean's girlfriend, and Clara, Lucas's childhood friend. Everyone was there looking for an escape from the city routine and college stress, just craving some leisure time and fun. On the evening of the third day, after a day of outdoor activities, the group gathered around the campfire. The sky was clear, but the darkness seemed denser than usual. Friends laughed and talked, but Lucas sensed that something in the atmosphere was different. Perhaps it was the wind that had suddenly fallen, or the silence that followed, but something made him feel uneasy. "Let's camp farther into the woods," Sean suggested, standing up and grabbing a backpack. "I heard some strange stories about this place. They say it's quieter there. I just want us to have a night of peace." Sophia, with a cynical smile, looked at him. "You and your horror stories, Sean. How about we enjoy the night without getting lost in the forest?" Clara, who was next to Lucas, seemed a little more receptive to the idea. "Maybe it's fun. The forest here seems to have a strange energy, but who knows? It's going to be a good adventure. How about we camp there in the clearing, where we always go?" suggested Lucas, trying to divert the focus from the darker subject. He didn't want to look like the fearful of the group, but the atmosphere of the night made him uncomfortable. Sean shrugged. "Okay then, if you don't have the courage, stay here. Sophia, are you coming with me?" Sophia smiled and nodded, taking Sean's hand. Clara and Lucas, for their part, decided to stay a little closer to the main camp. The plan was to separate for a while and then meet again. As the group began to disperse, a sense of unease came over Lucas. He looked to the side and saw Clara giving a nervous smile. "Is everything okay?" asked Lucas, trying to appear calm. "Yes, of course. I just don't like the silence here. Seems that the forest is watching us." Clara shook her head, trying to laugh. "But that's okay. It's just our imagination." However, as the night closed in even further, a distant howl cut through the silence. Clara stopped, looking at the forest with a worried look. "Did you hear that?" he asked. Lucas nodded, trying to appear indifferent, but the feeling that something was wrong increased by the second. "It was just a wolf. Or maybe a coyote," he said, though his voice was lower than usual. At this moment, Sean and Sophia had gone deeper into the forest, and the sound of howling echoed again. Lucas, with a growing sense of unease, tried to ignore it, but Clara looked straight at him, her eyes wide. "Lucas, what if it's not just a wolf?" Before he could answer, they heard quick footsteps coming from Sean and Sophia's direction. The howl got louder, now clearly closer. "I'm going after them," Lucas said. "Stay here, Clara. Don't move." Lucas walked in the direction of the steps, but as he advanced through the forest, darkness seemed to engulf everything around him. The sounds of the forest were now unusual, too distant to be natural. He felt the eyes of the forest above him, as if he was being watched for something, or someone. When he finally reached the point where Sean and Sophia were, he saw them standing there, staring into the darkness. They were motionless, but they didn't seem scared, at least not to the point of moving. The light of the campfire behind them illuminated their faces, but nothing more. Sophia, with a strange look, pointed to the darkness. "Did you see that, Lucas? The figure, it's there, in the clearing." Sean and Sophia seemed more apprehensive now, and Lucas felt a chill run down his spine. The figure that was there was no ordinary wolf. It was something much bigger, with glowing eyes that seemed to reflect the light of the campfire, something that, as he got closer, made the air around them appear denser. It was then that Lucas realized that there, in the heart of the forest, he was not alone. The air in the clearing seemed heavier, and the darkness closed around them. Lucas, Sophia, and Sean were there, paralyzed, looking at the slowly approaching figure. It was no ordinary wolf. His eyes shone supernaturally, reflecting the light of the distant campfire. The creature moved with a predatory grace, as if aware of its presence, waiting for the right moment to get even closer. "Luke, do you see this?" Sophia asked in a trembling voice, her gaze fixed on the figure. His expression was disconcerted, fear evident on his face. Sean, at his side, remained silent, motionless, his eyes fixed on the darkness, as if hypnotized by the creature. He didn't seem scared, but at the same time, he didn't seem to be in control of himself. Lucas felt his heart race. Something wasn't right. The figure in the forest with the bright eyes was getting closer and closer, but he couldn't move. Fear paralyzed him, as if he were trapped in a nightmare. He tried to speak, but his voice came out muffled. "Sean, Sophia, we need to get out of here, now," Lucas finally managed to tell, trying to pull Sophia by the hand, but Sean wouldn't move. He was still there, static, as if in a trance. The creature continued to get closer, closer by the second. Her footsteps were silent, but her presence made the surrounding environment seem denser, more oppressive. Lucas looked at the figure again, and something in his mind screamed that it wasn't natural, that it wasn't part of that place. Sophia, finally waking up from the state of paralysis, looked at Lucas, her eyes filled with terror. "What is this? What's going on with Sean?" She looked at her boyfriend, trying to reach him, but he was completely oblivious, as if he were someone else. "Sean, what's up with you?" Lucas screamed, but Sean didn't answer. Instead, he began to walk slowly, as if he were being guided by an invisible force. His steps were slow, as if he was approaching the creature without even realizing it. "Sean, come back!" Sophia screamed, but her voice seemed small before the growing sound of the howl that now echoed in various directions around them, as if they were surrounded. Lucas pulled Sophia away, running towards the camp, but the sound of the creature moving was constant, always closer. The howl did not stop, as if the forest was alive and hunting them. "We can't let him go alone," Sophia screamed, trying to pull Lucas back, but he knew they couldn't take any chances. The creature was still following them, and any false move could be fatal. But as they ran toward the camp, something made them stop. A figure appeared ahead, blocking the way. It was not a person, nor an animal. It was an indistinct shadow, which seemed to form from the very darkness of the forest. Its eyes shone brightly, as if reflecting the light of the stars, and the air around it seemed denser, as if the creature was absorbing all the energy around it. Lucas was paralyzed, unable to move. Sophia was by his side, wide-eyed, not knowing what to do. "She is watching us," Sophia whispered, barely able to speak. Lucas felt a surge of despair, but his mind was trying to connect to the pieces of the situation. Something was there, something that was hunting them. But what was that figure? What did she want? Before he could think of an answer, the sound of footsteps behind them made them turn quickly. Sean was there, but now he was no longer alone. Something followed him. The creature, or whatever it was approaching, and Sean seemed to be just a puppet out of control, guided by that presence. "Sean, what happened to you?" Lucas asked, desperate. Sean, with his eyes fixed on the creature, did not answer. Instead, he began to advance towards the shadow ahead, as if in a trance. The howl cut the night again, louder than ever. The figure of the creature, now fully visible, advanced towards Sean, who was walking as if he did not realize the impending danger. Whatever that creature was, it was close to revealing its true nature. Fear spread like a poison in Lucas and Sophia's minds. The shadow before them, now more visible, emanated an energy that seemed to choke the surrounding air. It was as if the forest itself had come to life, becoming an extension of the creature, with every tree, every branch, every leaf seeming to watch them. The howl that haunted them seemed to be not just a sound, but a call, an invocation. They were no longer just in a camp. They were trapped in something much bigger, something they couldn't control. That doesn't make sense, Lucas said, his eyes fixed on the approaching shadow. What is this? What are we doing here? Sophia, still wide-eyed, with dread, looked at him. I don't know, Lucas, but I feel like we're being handled, as if nothing is real, as if we were trapped in a nightmare. Paranoia took hold of them. Everything around him seemed distorted. What was real? The creature ahead? Sean, now walking unchecked, like a puppet, in the hands of something much stronger. The silence of the forest, which had once seemed comforting, now became oppressive. They could no longer distinguish what was true, what was just an illusion created by growing fear. They were being taken to a place where logic no longer had power. Every movement they made seemed to be watched, as if the forest itself was preparing to swallow them. We need to go now, Lucas said, his voice cracking. But the creature, now fully formed, seemed not to be just watching. She was absorbing the surrounding environment as if she were sucking energy from the forest. It was a presence, something that defied reality, a force that could not be explained. The fact that Sean no longer responds to anything, as if he were lost in a kind of trance, only added to the terror. He was being guided by the creature, but in such a deep state of mind control that he seemed to be completely detached from the world around him. Lucas, what if we can't get out? What if all this is real? Sophia asked, her eyes now more desperate. Dread had completely taken hold of her, and what had once seemed like a simple night of camping was now a fight for survival. The howl returned, this time stronger, closer, as if the creature was preparing to attack. Sophia's paranoia increased. By the second, it's all wrong. We cannot trust what we see. We don't know what's real. What are we facing? Right. It's not just an animal. He is not a mere creature. Lucas felt a chill run down his spine. He knew what she meant. He knew she was starting to question everything. What if that was their reality now? What if they were in a game played by forces they didn't understand, unable to escape the trap that the forest, or whatever it was, had set? The forest closed in on them, and each step seemed harder, heavier. They were being watched, hunted. But what made all this even more terrifying was the feeling that not even the forest, not even the creature, was the real enemy. The real fear was within them, within the paranoia that was beginning to consume their minds. Let's go back to the camp. There's no other option, Lucas said, his voice stronger now, though still full of doubt. He wasn't sure it would be safe there, but the idea of continuing to run through the woods seemed even more insane. Sophia looked at him, the expression of dread still plastered on her face. But there was something more now, something she was trying to understand. The creature, which now watched them with piercing eyes, did not attack. She was just there, waiting, like a ruthless presence that didn't need to act to spread terror. "And what are we going to do with Sean?" she asked, her voice breaking. They didn't know what was happening to their friend, or if he was still the same. Before Luke could answer, a sound came from behind them, a low, barely perceptible noise, but one that made Luke's blood run cold. The creature was no longer distant, it was within reach, and Sean, now as distant as his own mind, was being guided directly to her. Lucas and Sophia were paralyzed, as if fear had immobilized them. Sean, his eyes empty and expressionless, walked towards the figure watching them. The weight of helplessness took hold of them. The forest, with its menacing presence, was consuming them, and even the courage to fight didn't seem to be enough to escape. Sophia looked at Lucas, her eyes full of dread, her breath panting. Lucas, what about Sean? Her voice trembled, the concern for her boyfriend still taking over her, despite the terror that surrounded them. "I don't know. He's not him anymore," Lucas replied, the anguish in his voice. Sean seemed to be being controlled, moving as if in a trance, walking unconsciously towards the creature. The pain of seeing their friend Sophia's boyfriend, lost. To something they couldn't understand was almost unbearable. The forest around them seemed more and more alive. Trees were no longer just vegetation. They seemed to have become an extension of the creature. The ground became more difficult to navigate, as if something was resisting his movement, making each step heavier. The loneliness was overwhelming, more oppressive than the sound of the howl echoing from the darkness. "We can't leave him there," Sophia said, her voice a broken whisper. She looked at Lucas, and there was a growing despair in her eyes. "But how are we going to do it? What's going on with him?" Lucas didn't know how to answer. Fear of the unknown was consuming them. The creature that followed them did not seem in a hurry, but its mere being there, watching them, was more terrifying than any physical attack. The real terror was in the uncertainty. What was that thing? What was going on with Sean? And what would happen to them if they were consumed in the same way? Loneliness now felt like a physical burden. They were together, but separated from all. That was familiar. The forest was completely isolated, and the air itself felt heavier with each breath. At every moment, paranoia took over. They were being hunted, but the real battle was going on within their own minds. Meanwhile, Clara, who had been left alone in the camp, began to realize that something was terribly wrong. She was on the fringes of it all, away from the growing darkness that enveloped her friends, but the feeling of helplessness that consumed her made her question her own security. She could no longer sit still. The shadows on the trees seemed denser, more threatening. Something inside her knew that her friends were in danger, and she was supposed to go to them, but fear paralyzed her. The forest seemed to be distorting, as if something was luring Clara to an unknown destination, something she couldn't control. She stood up, trying to shake off the feeling that she was being watched. The sound of the forest now seemed more distorted, as if every leaf, every branch was conspiring against her. Clara knew she should go after Lucas and Sophia, but the emptiness in her mind seemed to be growing, making the darkness around her more oppressive. "I must find them," Clara muttered to herself, her voice almost lost among the whispers of the forest. But as she advanced, a howl cut through the air again, louder, closer, as if the forest itself was screaming for her to return. Back in the clearing, Sophia and Lucas didn't know what to do. With each step they took, the feeling that they were being watched, manipulated, grew. Despair began to mix with doubt. They were being hunted, but more than that, they were being consumed by the situation itself, by the feeling of no longer knowing what was real. "We have to find a way to save Sean," Sophia said, her voice trembling. But Lucas knew something bigger was happening. He didn't know what it was, but whatever it was on their minds now. They were being pushed into an abyss, not only physically, but psychologically. But the real threat was not just in what they could see or hear, it was in what they could not control, in the shadows that stretched inside their own minds. And what was left for Lucas and Sophia was now a bond that, though weakened by fear, was still there. Their shared friendship united them. But the terror of the situation was beginning to disfigure what was left of the trust they had placed in each other. "We need to keep going," Lucas said, trying to divert attention from the creature. "Sean, it's not him anymore. He's lost Sophia." Sophia did not immediately respond. She looked at Sean, who continued to walk towards the darkness, his eyes shining in a disturbing way. What was happening to him? And more importantly, what did it mean for them? "But he's my boyfriend," Sophia murmured, her voice trembling. "I can't just leave it. He needs us. He needs me." Lucas watched her, feeling the weight of the decision they were making. The friendship they had was not just an emotional bond. It was the only thread that still kept them connected to reality. But with Sean lost to whatever it was, the fear that they would lose even more of themselves was becoming unbearable. "Sophia, you have to understand that we can no longer save you." The creature is controlling him. It's not the Sean we know anymore, Lucas said, trying to stay calm, but his own voice wavered. I know you want to believe that he's in there, that we can do something, but he is no longer the same. The pain in Lucas's words cut through the air. He knew that Sophia was fighting something much deeper than immediate terror. It was the loss of trust, the loss of friendship, and the loss of someone she loved. And as much as Lucas tried to hold on to hope, he knew that the only way out of this forest was to accept that they were being pushed into something much bigger, something that none of them could control. I don't know, Lucas. I can't accept that he's lost forever. I can't lose him, Sophia said, almost breathless. The panic in his voice was clear. We are still friends. You trust me, don't you? Lucas looked at her, and the fear he felt now was shared. He knew that in situations like this, trust was everything, but there was a growing weight, as if the forest and the creature were undermining even the strongest bonds, making every decision seem like a risky gamble. Sophia, Lucas began, not knowing how to continue, but the sound of the howl cut his sentence. Stronger, closer. Something was changing in the forest, and the truth is that despite the friendship and trust they shared, there were no longer any guarantees. We can't go back, Sophia. We need to decide. Whatever happened to Sean? The creature is manipulating us too. If we don't do something now, we'll be like him. Lost, Lucas said, his voice hardening. The intensity of the moment forced them to see reality unadorned, and this terrified them. Sophia looked at Sean, her expression full of pain. She wanted to save the person she loved, but growing paranoia about what was happening to him and the forest forced them to make difficult decisions. I know, Lucas, I know. His voice was broken, but there was a kind of acceptance there, the acceptance that maybe friendship and trust needed to be what guided them now, more than anything else. Let's get out of this. Let's continue. Just the two of us. Let's find Clara, Lucas said firmly, trying to gather the strength he had left. Whatever was happening in the woods, whatever was controlling Sean, it wasn't going to be the end for them. Not while they were still fighting together. Sophia and Lucas, with their hearts racing, continued to stand still, but the feeling of being watched increased by the second. Sean was still ahead, walking with the same blank expression. He was completely lost, controlled by the creature, and Lucas knew that time was running out. He was no longer her friend. The creature had taken control of him, and they were about to pay the price for it. "Sean! No!" Sophie screamed, but the word had scarcely left her mouth when the creature, which had been watching them until then, moved with frightening rapidity. It was as if he had heard Sophie's plea, and in a brutal movement he charged forward with immeasurable force. The creature, now visibly transforming before them, left behind the wolf's form. His body, once robust and hairy, began to fade, distorting into a liquid flowing shadow. The wolf, with its glowing eyes, gave way to a shadowy entity that seemed to grow and expand, absorbing all the light around it. Its shape became hazy, without a clear definition, as if it were made of the darkness of the forest itself. She was both shadow and substance, moving with an otherworldly fluidity. In an instant, the shadow advanced on Sean. The creature lunged at him with a speed that neither of them could perceive. Before they could react, she enveloped Sean with her shadows, pulling him into her. The howl that echoed through the forest was a dull scream, and Sean's human form disappeared, swallowed by the creature. The sound of Sean's body being crushed by darkness was drowned out by the density of terror in the air. Sophia, still in shock, could not believe her eyes. The being that had been a wolf now became a living shadow, an entity that transcended everything they could understand. Sean, Sophia's boyfriend, had been destroyed, and there was nothing left but a darkness that seemed to swallow all hope. "No! No!" Sophia fell to her knees, her voice lost in the emptiness of the forest. Panic gripped her as reality became more and more surreal. The creature wasn't just an animal, it wasn't just a beast. She was something much bigger, something immortal, without limits. The terror of the situation turned to pure despair, the grief over Sean's loss crushing any shred of rationality. Lucas grabbed Sophia by the shoulders, trying to stop her from getting lost anymore. "Sophia! Raises! We can't stay here! Let's go!" The creature, now completely in shadow form, slowly moved away, but its presence was still overwhelming. He no longer attacked, but watched, as if he were deliberately letting them suffer, absorbing every bit of their fear. "I can't believe it. He is gone." Sophia could barely speak, but the words were broken by sobs. She wanted to run, but the words wouldn't come out. Reality dominated her in a cruel way. The forest now seemed more alive than ever, no longer with trees and wildlife, but with an oppressive entity. The creature was everywhere at once, and the shadow that had formed from its transformation seemed to have no end. The feeling of helplessness took over them in a relentless way. There were no more answers, no more salvation. All that was left was to run, but what they were running and where were questions that even Lucas couldn't understand. The despair in Sophia was palpable. The creature had taken Sean, and now all that remained was the echo of his death. The forest seemed to be silent, but it was not a silence of relief. It was as if the air itself was dense, as if the surrounding nature was compressing into one big, heavy breath. Lucas and Sophia were alone, more alone than they had ever been, immersed in a nightmare from which they could not awaken. I can't lose no one else," Sophia murmured, her voice broken as she clung to Lucas, trying to stay on her feet. The words felt empty, meaningless, as she knew that the loss of Sean was not something they could recover from. The creature had delivered a killing blow, and the darkness of the forest seemed to celebrate its victory. The creature's howl echoed again, closer, deeper. The sound was no longer just that of an animal, but of something that transcends any logic. He came from all sides, as if the whole forest was his expanse, as if it were alive in some way they could not comprehend. Sophia looked at Lucas, her eyes now distant. Fear was like an invisible chain that bound them to a fate they could not avoid. "Lucas, what are we going to do? What is it? What's happening to us?" Before Lucas could answer, a distant but unmistakable sound cut through the silence. Sophie's scream. He knew that what was left now was to escape, but the presence of the creature around him made even the words heavy in the air. But what no one knew was that, on the edge of the forest, Clara, far from everything, now heard those screams. She was in a safer, more distant place, but the echoes of despair began to reach her ears, a scream that crossed the night and entered directly into her heart. "Sophia." The word went out like a whisper. Fear took her immediately. She knew something was terribly wrong, and the sound of her friend in agony wasn't something she could ignore. Clara looked around, completely isolated, not knowing where her friends were, but with the certainty that she was connected to them in some way. The fear of loss drove her to act. "I'm not going to leave you alone," he murmured, his voice full of resolution. She didn't know what she could do or what she could face, but she knew she had to go. Clara, more determined than ever, took what she could take with her and ran into the darkness, feeling the pressure of the unknown growing with every step. The forest that once seemed peaceful now seemed to swallow everything it touched. Each tree seemed to watch her, each shadow seemed to have a life of its own, and Sophie's screams guided her like a beacon of despair and hope. In the heart of the forest, Lucas and Sophia were immersed in hopelessness. Sean's death had been just the beginning. They were being hunted, but what terrified them most was the feeling that the entire forest was against them. What once seemed like a simple hike in a camp now became a battle for survival. But the fight was not against just one monster. It was against everything that seemed real and false at the same time. "Sophia, we have to get out of here. Soon," Lucas said, his voice forcing a decision he didn't want to make. He looked at his friend and knew that the words he said were empty. There was no more going out, there was no more security. The forest had become an impenetrable prison. But just as hope seemed to have completely disappeared, a figure appeared. In the distance, piercing the mist and shadows, Clara, with her newfound determination, ran towards them, not knowing what awaited her, but with the intention of saving her friend. The forest seemed to stretch endlessly in front of him, a labyrinth of shadows and mystery. Clara, now closer to Sophia and Lucas, carried with her a sense of despair mixed with fierce determination. Sophia's scream still echoed in her mind, and she knew there was no more time to hesitate. She had a mission, and nothing would make her back down. In the backpack she was carrying, a 12-gauge was securely fastened, and next to it emergency flares were ready to be used. The forest in front of her was sweltering, but Clara could not afford to be afraid. She knew her friends were in danger, and whatever was attacking them, she needed to help them escape. Although the weapon was heavy, it represented a chance for protection, but Clara did not know what she was facing. She knew something was very wrong. His friends were changed, lost in a twisted reality, and whatever had happened to Sean, it was now a matter of survival. The creature she imagined was something physical, but the nature of the events seemed to suggest that there was something deeper and more threatening. But the one thing she knew for sure was that she had to find them. As she approached the clearing, Clara saw Lucas and Sophia, still surrounded by the fear and darkness of the forest. They were silent, trying to process the loss of Sean. But Clara realized that something even more sinister was approaching. The very idea that there was something greater lurking, an unseen presence that seemed to dominate the forest, made her shudder. But she couldn't hesitate. Her friend needed her. "Clara!" Sophia exclaimed, her voice full of relief, but also with a hint of uncertainty. Do you have a gun?" Clara nodded, feeling the weight of the decision now taking shape. "That's all we have. If we don't face this, we won't get out of here alive." She looked around, feeling the pressure of the forest and the situation. "We need to be ready for what is coming, and we need to act fast." Lucas looked at Clara, relief visible on his face, but also a new tension. They were about to face something that not even guns could stop, something they still didn't understand, but that had already consumed Sean and now threatened them. Clara put on the 12-gauge firmly, determined not to allow despair to consume them. "If something happens, we will use the flares. The light can give us a chance to protect ourselves." She looked at the two of them, her eyes now more resolute. "But if we don't go fast, it may be too late." The three were aware of the seriousness of the situation. With each step they took, the pressure increased. It was no longer a matter of finding a way out, but of fighting for survival. They didn't know what they were facing, but they knew they couldn't turn back. Screenplay: The Shadow of the Wolf. Sean is dead. The forest was silent, but the silence was heavy, almost overwhelming. The fear was still fresh in Lucas and Sophia's hearts, but there was something more to Sophia now. The pain of loss was still stamped on her face, but now she had a focus. They had to keep going. The only thing that kept them standing was the hope that they might be able to get out of there alive. But the certainty of Sean's death, still latent in their minds, wouldn't come out. When Clara finally reached them, Sophia's pain overflowed. She looked at Clara, her eyes full of tears, but also with a strength she didn't know she still had. "Clara, Sean, he's dead." Sophie spoke, her voice low but full of sadness and hopelessness. "The creature," she picked it up, "he was crushed, swallowed by it. I couldn't do anything. He was no longer the Sean we knew. Clara looked at Sophia. The shock stamped on her face. She didn't know how to react. He could not imagine what his friends had been through, and the pain seemed an unbearable weight. But before she could speak, Sophia interrupted her. That monster. That thing, Clara, she killed him. He was no longer him, were missing, as if the creature had taken everything he was. The pain in Sophia's words was evident, but the determination was also beginning to grow within her. She had lost Sean, but she wouldn't lose anyone else. She wouldn't allow it. Lucas stood beside them, listening to them with a blank expression, but his eyes reflected the fear and weariness that had already become his constant companions. He knew that Sophia's words weren't just about Sean. They were all on the edge of the abyss, on the edge of madness, and whatever was hunting them was still lurking. But now, they could no longer just be victims. Clara looked at Sophia and Lucas, feeling the weight of everything they had faced so far. I didn't know what was happening here, but I'm with you. Let's get out of this, together. Sophia looked at Clara, her eyes reflecting the same pain, but also a flame of hope. Sean. He is gone. But if there is still any chance of surviving, it is together. Let's fight. It doesn't matter what that thing is, let's face it. The sound of the surrounding forest seemed distorted, as if the world was slowing down, but fear continued to accelerate them. Clara, Sophia, and Lucas were closer than ever, but the darkness of the forest still felt like a huge prison. The terror that had hunted them that night hadn't faded. But now, with the loss of Sean and the threat that still surrounded them, there was a sense of urgency in their steps. They knew that time was running out, and confrontation was inevitable. Sophia, with her face marked by the pain of loss, looked at Clara and Lucas. We need to put an end to this. We can't run anymore. Clara, with the 12-gauge firmly in her hands, looked at the two of them. The intensity in Sophia's eyes was contagious. They were all on the brink, but now together they had a chance. The creature's howl cut through the air again, louder, closer. Sophia trembled, but not from fear, but from pure anger and despair. She would not allow anyone else to die there. They wouldn't get lost to that thing. Let's go, Clara said, the determination in her voice conveying the confidence they needed. There is no turning back. Let's face it. They advanced into the heart of the forest, the dim light of the lanterns and the sound of their footsteps being drowned out by the incessant scream that came from all sides. The trees, which once seemed to offer refuge, now seemed to move against them. The creature watched them, a mutant shadow that moved erratically, as if there were no limits to its form. What had been a wolf was now a being of pure darkness, its eyes shining like beacons in the pitch black of night. She's coming, Lucas said, pausing in the middle of the clearing. We have to fight now. The creature approached, its eyes fixed on them. She moved forward, and the feeling of being consumed by her presence was like an avalanche of dread. But then, as if the forest itself was reacting to the terror, Clara fired the 12-gauge into the air. The blast of the shot echoed through the forest, a blinding light illuminating the path ahead. The creature retreated for a moment, as if it was being burned by the light. Now! Sophia screamed, her voice cutting through the air, and with a quick movement lit a flare, creating a burst of bright light that blinded the creature momentarily. Lucas, overcome by adrenaline, ran forward, taking what was left of his courage and advancing with Clara. The creature attempted to attack, but with the flare illuminating the surrounding space, the creature hesitated, its movements becoming erratic. Clara fired again, and this time the creature was thrown back, its form shaking as if it was trying to maintain its form, but the light and shots were enough to weaken it. The creature, as if realizing that its advantage was waning, disappeared into the shadows, retreating into the darkness of the forest. They had won that round, but the feeling that something else was lurking still haunted them. Sophia, panting, looked at Clara and Lucas. a faint smile forming on her face. "I think we did it." Clara looked around, but the shadows of the forest seemed to still be alive, as if the forest itself was breathing with them. "It's not over, but for now, yes, we are alive." The drive back to camp seemed longer than ever. The trees that had once seemed threatening were now silent, as if the forest was finally allowing them to breathe. Clara, Sophia, and Lucas advanced with heavy steps, fear still vibrating in their bodies, but the feeling of returning to the place that had welcomed them, even temporarily, brought unexpected relief. When they reached the edge of the clearing, the camp appeared before them, silent but intact. The tents were where they had been left, and the fire that once burned was now extinguished. The camp seemed peaceful, but the three knew that nothing there could erase what they had experienced. The weight of the night was still in their hearts, the memory of Sean and the shadow of the creature still hanging over them like a threat that didn't completely move away. "We're back," Sophia said, her voice low, as if she feared the forest would follow them. She looked around, but the stillness of the place only added to the feeling that, even in the distance, the darkness was still watching them. Clara, looking at the dark sky, took a deep breath. "For now, yes, but this is not over. We're just beginning to understand what really happened here." Lucas took one last look at the forest, as if waiting for the creature to emerge again from the shadows. But the only thing that accompanied him was the sound of his own footsteps and the muffled screams that still echoed in his mind. They were alive, but what did that mean now? "Let's rest," Clara suggested, trying to break the silence in a firmer voice. "But we cannot forget what we saw, nor what may still be out there." Together they entered the camp, but the peace of the place seemed temporary, as if something greater was waiting, ready to appear again when they least expected it.